You agree with me, that was quite an impressive film. I won't ask if you enjoyed it, but I will ask you whether you found it interesting. Did you?
Yes, of course.
I hope you stay for the discussion. But before we do that, Dee, would you join me up here?
Yeah.
We're going to go from the indigenous people of Asia who are under attack by those who covet their precious metals and resources to the song of the indigenous people of this continent. I'm very pleased to be able to present one of the people who is going to be among the many entertainers at the 28th Annual Socialist Action May Day celebration, which will be on the Saturday prior to May 1st. It'll be on April the 26th. There's a leaflet in front of you. You can see the whole program planned for that day. And one of the performers is this woman, Diem La Fortune. Dee is the 2013 Canadian Folk Music Awards Aboriginal Songwriter of the Year nominee. She has a CD called Beauty in Hard Times. And she's going to play a song for us, and then we're going to hear some announcements and open up the discussion. So,
What do you want to hear, Derek?
well, something that connects with the film, if you can.
Yeah, okay. I have so many songs that connect with the film.
Okay,
What was that?
it's a newspaper. Don't worry.
Problems start here. Many miles from home we taught in your fine schools that a history book's a weapon, not a tool. In many voices we try to understand what has come upon this land. Many good intentioned Christians tell us, children, you must listen, or they kill us with a kindness in God's name. They terrorize on a starry night in a Central American town. Loved ones pray their loved ones won't be found. While in the deepest part of a silent night, shots ring out in the dark. The missing ones will not return. Their killers never caught, and in the paper there's a caption: guerrillas killed in action. But they were children. They were only children. And how the mothers cry. On a dusty road by an olive grove they rest. On women with babies at their breasts. Upon the souls who went before them, lay beneath the earth, an earth made rich with bloodshed before their births. And on the TV there's a news flash, more victims in the Holy Land. But they were children. They were only children. And how their mothers cry. It goes on and on. We see it every day. We don't need the paper. We don't need the news. We all have the answer. We all share for but we all lose. In the capitals of these places they call nations, there are papers pushed and proud congratulations. And while victimized or criminalized are laughed at and are lied to, our plans were laid but a death machine. Will these madmen never tire? No, they kneel and they pray to a materialist savior. But they were children. Once they were children. What made their mothers cry? And where are all the children? Where are all the children? Where are all the children? What makes your mother cry? Little children everywhere, little children stop the wars. Little children everywhere, little children stop the wars. Little children everywhere, little children stop the wars. And if you want to hear that song on the radio talking about real stuff and not teenage angst and bullshit from the bourgeoisie, CBC Searchlight, I'm in it, and that song is the song that I'm taking to the competition. So if you go to Searchlight and you look up Where Are All the Children, or DM, D-I-E-M, La Fortune, please vote for me. You can vote once a day. And it's kind of like, it kind of be nice to hear some songs with content on the radio. Because I'm really sick of the bullshit we have to listen to.
You and us both. Remember, a day without a vote for Dee is a day without sunshine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dee, for coming tonight. And we'll see you again, if not before then, certainly at the
I'm just going to put my name up there. So
May Day celebration. Yeah, put information on the board. That's great. So I'm going to make some announcements, and then we'll proceed from there. So the Rebel film series, which you saw one episode this evening, continues next week with Apartheid Did Not Die, and that's not such a recent film, but it's a critical examination of the legacy of Nelson Mandela and the present ANC government in South Africa. And our guest speaker is Jamu Nangawe. He's an educator and an organizer with Network for the Elimination of Police Violence and the Network for Pan-African Solidarity. So come here, and it'll be in the same room, room 211. We've had to shift rooms in the last few weeks, but it will be right here next Friday, April the 4th. So I hope you can make it to that event. And once again, we invite you to buy the latest edition of Socialist Action newspaper, which features, among other things, the U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine and what are the politics behind that, and the campaign by Ottawa and Washington against the government in Venezuela, supporting the right-wing protests that have been trying to overthrow a government that has been elected and re-elected and re-elected and re-elected, and has achieved enormous social progress in that Latin American country. So get the latest issue of our paper. On February the 6th, Socialist Action, which hosts this Rebel Film series, conducted a protest with many important activists in the gay and lesbian community in Toronto against Russia's anti-gay law. That was on the day the Sochi Winter Olympics began. That's just to give you an idea of what we do. That was held on February the 6th, the coldest day of the year. 200 people gathered at church in Bloor to protest the anti-gay law in Russia and to demonstrate down Church Street to Ryerson, where a meeting was held. And about 2 weeks ago, and if you were here early before the film, you saw some of the photos, some of the slides from that event. Socialist Action initiated a protest against postal service cuts. You know, Canada will be perhaps the first industrialized country in the world to end door-to-door home mail delivery. So we were at Joe Oliver's constituency office. This was before he became finance minister. We had over 100 people there. Many different unions and other groups participated. This is another example of what Socialist Action does as a campaigning organization. International Workers' Day is just around the corner. I've already mentioned the event on April the 26th. It's at the Free Times Cafe, and you have the information in front of you. And we have a big conference coming up, again, here at OISE on May 23, 24. And the details, again, are on the other side of one of those sheets in front of you on the table. So we invite you to mark that in your calendar and plan to be with us for an international educational conference, the theme of which is Capitalism is Organized Crime. And that's reflected on this button, which is also available at the entrance. So if you'd like to learn more about how to change the world, in the interests of working people, the vast majority, we invite you to join us, to join Socialist Action, and you can fill out a form also on the tables in front of you, and take it to the display table before you leave. We invite you to read our press on a regular basis. The subscription is $20 a year, and to keep in touch. So, before we open the discussion, it would have been my, not only my duty, but my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, James Clark, who is a founding member of the Toronto Coalition to Stop the War and a steering committee member of the Canadian Peace Alliance. But something happened, something funny happened on the way to the forum, not so funny. Something happened today arising from a critical election campaign in one of the largest unions in the city, actually, the teaching assistants at York University, members of CUPE 3903. And to tell you what happened and why James is not here with us is Yazin Kaya, a member of Socialist Action, who was elected secretary of that union. There was a recount election for the top position. And Yazin, can you tell us what happened to James Clark?
Very shortly, James Clark, myself, and 7 other people, we decided to run on a slate for the executive in CUPE 3903, which organizes teaching assistants and contract faculty at York University. It's a huge union local. We have 3,400 people, members there. But before we ran as a slate, in these elections, only 30 people were showing up in the meetings. And in the previous elections, only 80 people, 80, went to the polls to vote out of the 3,400. We decided to change this. We decided to have a more membership-driven and accessible union with a union democracy. Anyway, I won. I mean, I got elected, so did 5 other people on our slate. The person who is running for the chair position got most of the votes out of the 3 candidates, but he couldn't get the outright majority. He couldn't get the 51% of the votes. So there has been a second round between the 2 candidates who were running for the chair position.
So tell us the name of this candidate,
Faiz Ahmed is the person on Union Renewal slate, our slate, running against Christina Russo, another teaching assistant. Anyway, this was a very contested election, and there were many problems there. Well, we were very public about our political line, but our opponents were not that political. Anyway, I will not do any negative campaigning here. But anyway, so there was a problem, complained about our candidate. So election officers questioned the credibility of the elections. So James Clark, our spokesperson, is now currently talking with the election officer to solve the problem. Hopefully he will still solve the problem. They will solve the problem, and we will be declared as the winner of the elections. James sent his regrets. He can't be here today with us. I promised him that we will try our best to fill his spot. But this was really an emergency. That's why he couldn't make it. As I said, he sends his regrets. Such things happen in union movement, unfortunately.
Yes, okay,
How many people actually ended up going out to vote, you know?
This time, close to 500. In the previous elections, before we got involved, 84 people voted. This time, close to 500.
And you hope for greater things in the future.
Yes.
So, you see, we are at a disadvantage, and my apologies that James is not here because he's engaged in this contested process involving the runoff election for the top position against those who are trying to disqualify the candidate who probably won the top position. That remains to be seen, but we believe that's so. But Socialist Action is part of the Canadian Peace Alliance and the Toronto Coalition to Stop the War, and we've been very active, as you can tell from some of the banners decorating the walls of this room, on the fight against war from a solidarity and anti-imperialist perspective. So I really haven't prepared any remarks on this subject. It's a great film. I think it speaks for itself. But I'm just going to make a few observations and then open it up to your questions and your comments. So I hope you'll bear with us in this unforeseen circumstance. Well, I think the film makes the argument pretty clearly, demonstrates it, I think, rather starkly, that the war on terrorism is a permanent war. It's not an occasional conflict. It's not seeking out those who committed specific crimes against specific people or even institutions. But in fact, it's a widening, ever-widening war against any obstacles to what? Obstacles to U.S. domination of the world. And I don't mean U.S. Americans on an assembly line in Indiana. I'm talking about the 1%, actually the 0.01%, who control Wall Street, who control the giant corporations in every important sector of the American economy. And it's not just Washington, it's the allies of Washington who allow this to happen or who participate directly in it. And that includes Bay Street in Ottawa, for sure. Just a week and a half ago, Ottawa declared that the Canadian armed presence, major armed presence in Afghanistan is over. And keeping a promise which had been broken twice before over the past 12 years, but declaring that Canadian participation in the war is over. Well, I think that's something that can be questioned in terms of the ongoing presence in the region. But anyway, take it at face value. There was a ceremony where some of the troops were returning to the country, and Stephen Harper was there, and his entourage for the photo op. And he took the opportunity to say that Afghanistan is better off today than it was. Well, I think this is a questionable claim. What is the truth? Afghanistan remains perhaps one of the poorest countries in the world, in spite of the fact that not millions of dollars, but billions of dollars have been poured into that country in order to secure it for Western interests, and there's very little evidence that it has, in fact, raised the standard of living. Afghanistan is a very poor country. The major industry, as I think you know quite well, is the production of illicit drugs, heroin, narcotics, drugs that breed dependence and a downward spiral of misery. That occupies about a quarter of the population. The rest are engaged in one or another level of security operations, the foreign occupation, which continues even though Canadian troops have been declared withdrawn en masse. There is still a Canadian troop presence in Kabul around the embassy, but the truth is Afghanistan is poorer than it's ever been, and in miserable condition and not secure. The lack of security was punctuated by the attack at the luxury hotel in Kabul, in which 9 people died, 2 of them Canadian aid workers. That's a tragedy. But the greater tragedy is that Western imperial intervention in Afghanistan has fostered a hatred against the occupier. And this is not for the first time, and it's not for the first time in the world, and not for the first time in Afghanistan, where British intervention was repelled after decades in the early part of the 20th century, the Soviet debacle, and those who followed since. So Afghanistan is no more secure. Our politicians maintain, well, there are more girls going to school in Afghanistan. But how sustainable, if true, how sustainable is that development when the occupation is hated and the schools are vulnerable to those who say, we will not allow them to impose their education, their culture, their military dominance, their ability at will to break down a door and massacre a family or a wedding party or any other aggregation of people in the country. The gains claimed, if true, are highly, highly vulnerable to being overturned. And in fact, the only solution is for the people of the country, as this is true for every country, in any country, everywhere, to manage their own affairs, to sort out their own differences without foreign interference, and to build institutions that they can call their own. The great tragedy of the intervention has been actually to foster the Islamic fundamentalist militancy against the West. The effect of the Western intervention, as Scahill demonstrates so well, not only with regard to Afghanistan, but Yemen and Somalia and other places, actually fosters the most reactionary elements that fill a void, the nationalist void, the forces that say, we will remove the invader, we will end the occupation. And they're in a position to do it, and they get their weapons somewhere, and they often get their weapons from regimes that have good relations with Washington, like the one in in Saudi Arabia. Why the imperialist intervention in the first place? Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It has great beauty, it has great diversity, but it also has, a very difficult climate, from very hot to very cold. Well, I think that there are at least 5 reasons. We could probably come up with 500. One, it's been the aim throughout the Cold War and after, on the part of Washington and its allies, to surround Russia with US-backed regimes. Do we see an example of this happening today in Eastern Europe? I think you know. There's a great article in our press about the US-backed coup in Ukraine. Now there's a government in Ukraine, chiefly Western Ukraine, which includes a party called Svoboda, Freedom Party. This is a neo-Nazi party. They have 10 ministries in the government in Kiev. This is a neo-Nazi party, and there's a picture in our press of the leader of that party, with the salute and all, shaking hands with high representatives of Washington. So it's surrounding Russia with US-backed regimes. Russia is not a worker state. It's not no pretense to socialism, certainly if it ever did. But it is a power, a declining power, but a nuclear-armed power. And the West, the European Union, and America, and Canadian imperialism, their junior partner in this business, covet the natural resources of Eastern Europe and of Russia. And so surrounding that country and if possible, bringing it to its knees or getting more favorable conditions is what they seek. Secondly, geopolitical power in the region was another reason for intervention in Afghanistan. The country borders many other countries. Thirdly, Afghanistan does possess very valuable mineral resources. Fourthly, it was seen as a pipeline, as a path for a pipeline for oil and gas from the Caspian Sea through to the Indian Ocean for transshipment to all buyers who are interested in oil and gas, and there are many of those. And fifthly, there are profits to be made for the war industry, and there is good practice, I put this in quotation marks, for Canadian forces and for Allied forces. Not just Stephen Harper, but many editorialists have been saying, well, not much was accomplished in Afghanistan, but our military is in shape, it's tip-top, it's ready to intervene everywhere and anywhere. Well, where have they been intervening? Well, in Libya, it was a Canadian who commanded the aerial bombardment of the country, even though they said that this was not in the cards. They dismembered Yugoslavia and bombed Serbia extensively on the basis of the claim that there was a genocidal assault on the Kosovars. Those people didn't exercise their right to self-determination under the old Yugoslav multinational state, but this was no justification for dismembering and privatizing the whole works and supporting right-wing nationalist parties in each of the constituted republics so that the West could have its way in the Balkans. And Canadian forces were involved in Somalia, a very disgusting episode that led to the disbanding of a military contingent there after the torture of a Somalian teenager. I think many of you know the example to which I refer. Canadian forces have been in the Persian Gulf, still are. We had demonstrated 250,000 people in the streets of Montreal, 80,000 people in the streets of Toronto at Dundas Square, and tens of thousands of Canadians all across the Canadian state demonstrated in 2003, I think it was March 2003, against support for Bush's intervention in Iraq. So Chrétien shifted gears slightly and said, we won't go into Iraq. We'll have ships in the Persian Gulf to help the Americans turn the Persian Gulf into an American lake, and we'll move forces into Afghanistan for 12 years. Over 400 Canadian dead and thousands of Afghan civilians and others killed in the process. There's the Canadian presence on the Golan Heights, Israeli-occupied territory of Syria, in Cyprus, in Congo, where the UN isolated and helped to overthrow the progressive government of Patrice Lumumba, a great nationalist and Democrat. There's the Suez debacle. You can read in the books of Eve, help me. Eve Engler, thank you. A rush of too many thoughts. Eve Engler, a number of books on Canadian foreign policy available at the table there. I recommend you pick up those for a deeper understanding of Canadian complicity with imperialist intervention everywhere. What can we do? This is my final point, and then I'll open it to you, your comments and questions, of course. What can we do? There's just, 50 of us at this meeting, a few thousand people, anti-war, anti-imperialists across the Canadian state. What can we do? Well, we've actually done a bit which gives a clue as to what more we can do. We can help to win the working class organizations in this country to an anti-war and anti-imperialist perspective. We ourselves can't stop wars, but we can bring them to an end, and we can shift public opinion massively if we win the fight for anti-war positions in the main institutions of the working class. And I'm talking about the trade unions and the labor-based New Democratic Party. With all of its problems, it is an arena for debate of these issues. And have we been successful? I would say we've been modestly successful, partially successful. The Socialist Action is the initiator of the NDP Socialist Caucus. How many of you have heard of the Socialist Caucus? A few of you have. Yeah, it certainly does, more than ever. We have about 10 people joining it on a weekly basis. So the Socialist Caucus, with that banner Canada out of Afghanistan now, won the NDP to that position. Jack Layton and the NDP were won to that position, not intellectually won, but pressured to adopt that position because of the anti-war movement in the streets and our agitation in the party, culminating in a vote at the Federal Convention in Quebec City in 2006. I can tell you more about that story, but I'll leave it at that. And then at the Federal NDP Convention in Montreal, just last spring, this orange banner was the talk of the town, and it was on every television network and mentioned in the press. Stop Obama's drone wars. There was a speaker from a bigwig in the U.S. Democratic Party, which bears responsibility, along with Wall Street, for these attacks, which are not confined to Afghanistan or Pakistan or Somalia, but are worldwide, and kill civilians in the course of doing their business, almost on a routine basis, and there's no end in sight. So we popularized that position in the labor-based NDP, and we think that's something worth doing. Whatever you might think about how much energy should be devoted to work in that party or some other thing, okay, these are tactical issues we can debate and should debate, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the value of waging a fight shows that a handful of people, or a few dozen people, or a few hundred people could actually intervene in such a way as to shift public opinion significantly on important public issues in an anti-war, anti-imperialist direction. That's all I'm arguing. I don't make any bigger claims than that. And if you think that's a good thing to do, then you should join Socialist Action, because that's what we're all about doing. So I'm just going to stop there and open the floor to questions and comments. I'm going to try to do a gender-balanced list. And if you can confine your remarks to 3 minutes, that'll enable more people to participate.
I'm going to confine my remarks to 10 seconds. Is it possible to be part of the Socialist caucus of the NDP without joining the NDP?
No, you have to be a party member in order to be in a caucus in that party.
Okay.
But you can join Socialist Action without joining the NDP. And we're involved in all of the things I mentioned. Other comments and questions? The floor is yours. Sorry for taking so much time, and these remarks were totally unrehearsed. We were hoping that our guest speaker from the Canadian Peace Alliance would have been here. Yes, sir.
I want to suggest that part of the effectiveness of this film is that there's a resonance with a broader range of opinion than simply left. That is, there's suggestions that perhaps the United States is evolving towards increasingly heavy reliance on paramilitary and somewhat crypto-fascist type structures. And I think showing the childhood photos of the grandson who was killed and so forth plays into that. I was trying to think of various people I know who are extremely unresponsive to Socialist Action pleas. And I think that the sense, if it can be connected also, I'm not denigrating your work at all, but I think if it can be connected in some instances with the recognition that by far the most sophisticated assessments of the ecological crisis in the United States are made by the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And one wonders whether a lot of this activity, your point number 5, I believe, was, could extend not just the war industry profits, but the development of effective institutions for controlling the North American population in a time of severe ecological disturbance. So I think that has a strong, broad appeal.
Right, good points, excellent. This is the surveillance society. More and more governments are not only repressing and murdering their opponents abroad, but also surveilling the domestic population and veering towards authoritarianism. So any way that we can make that argument in a broad way, drawing in other voices.
And the strong discussed with
Absolutely.
Putin is interesting because Putin is a KGB product. The Bushes are a CIA product.
Yeah.
And one can see how a disturbance, if I think capitalism is increasingly badly and shakily organized crime. And if one can suggest that our Putin could be the successor to McRaven. McRaven strikes me as a conceivable leader on a white horse for the United States in a time of a severe crisis.
Good points. Tyler?
I apologize for my tardiness, but I did have something to say regarding Mr. Putin. I think what's important to notice about his administration, and particularly his actions in Crimea and a few years ago, Georgia, that he has been quite villainized to the point of almost becoming a cartoon villain by Western media. And this is, of course, a very effective tool used by the Obama and Harper administrations, as by villainizing him and his aggressive actions, we tend to ignore the actions that they themselves have committed in their own imperialist aggressions. Never, in my recollection of being politically active, have I ever seen such blatant political hypocrisy that has been demonstrated by the Obama administration.
I totally agree with that, and you can read his speech to the Duma. It sounds a lot better than Harper and Obama.
Yeah, part of that speech is reproduced in our paper, so you'll be able to read it if you have it. Any other new voices?
Over here, but I don't want to be on screen.
Well, I want to call on women. Are there any women who want to speak or ask a question? Okay, Dee,
Well,
and then I'll go to you.
I find the American situation really interesting. It's the famous philosopher Pretty Boy Floyd said, he was indigenous, by the way. Some will get you with a 6-gun, some with a fountain pen, according to Woody Guthrie, who wrote the song. When we say about having new voices join us, I think we have to really think about joining the voices of indigenous people, and I've been saying this for years. As we go, so the world goes. Because we're the canaries in the coal mine of capitalism. This is imperialism right in our own backyard. And in the United States, there has got a greater, America and Canada are both nations that have with little memory and very little history. But you know what's as significant is when America won its war of independence against the British, all the treaties that had been signed with indigenous peoples in America didn't count anymore. Which is sort of like why in Canada we're sort of in a different place in a funny kind of way, because Trudeau, for whatever, included the treaties in Section 35 of the 1982, the Patriotic Constitution, which is kind of interesting. I just want to remind people of that, because everything that they have, the rich people have, has been taken from this land. It's been raped. And we can't forget that. And I don't know more, and there's a lot of movements. So we're already doing the work, but we need bodies out there to support us. We really need to form alliances and to decolonize ourselves around the issues of the relationship of even progressives with indigenous people. You know, you and I have had this, we're friends again. We've always been friends, but I had to just step back because I had to get regrounded from, I had to do my own decolonizing, and I wasn't that colonized. That's why I got thrown out of university.
Thank you, Dee. The struggle continues. We'll be there shoulder to shoulder. Yes.
Just following up a bit, I think it's useful to know that John Ralston Saul wrote an excellent book a few years ago called Canada, a Fair Country. And he made a very strong case for including the Aboriginal recognition in this country. And he said this is something that we have neglected for far too long.
And I'm singing with them on the 30th at the Church of the Redeemer.
Oh, good.
Sonny, I think you were next.
Yeah, I was thinking that a lot of what we saw is that America is still doing a lot of covert wars with the blessing of the president, and war is a big business. Like even their military cuts that are proposed are getting a lot of attention because people want to keep things going. And ultimately, Russia is another superpower that can sort of do what they want, and if America is going to go around bombing people, of course people are going to be mad, and that gets more people riled up against them, so that's why there's more people that will take arms against them, so they're just creating more people that hate them. So I don't know what award this movie got or anything like that, but it's interesting to see that Americans are being, learning the truth behind what's going on.
Yeah, this film was nominated for an Academy Award. It didn't win, but undoubtedly the nomination increased its viewership, its reach. Yes, sister.
I just wanted to add that
Could you stand? I find it hard to hear, and I imagine others might.
I've been in the social department for many, many years. As you know, I've always been more visible on marches. suffice to say, I wanted to bring to attention that what Obama said is that the world is at war. If the world is at war, then he cannot, and I'm not going to, I'm not his lawyer, you know, but I mean, just, he cannot ignore that. And if knowing America as America is, and the bodies that go in to save saviors of people in different lands, is that they have to wait until somebody or a whole village is killed before they will go in and take action. So they don't just run in just to shoot people, but a whole village was actually demolished before America or any other nation who are supposed to be protectors of lands where governments are not as efficient as first world countries, before they take action. And so that has to be addressed when we try to sew up and put bandages over everything, and you know, as opposed to that. And when we sit back here, not being there, we don't know what is propaganda, what other people want us to do, and how are we supposed to help them? How can we help people? How can we help people who no longer have homes, who no longer have food, who no longer have clothes? They're not even educated, you know? So they just go by word of mouth, but their belly and their coldness alerts them. And that's what they pay attention to. Not 500 years from now, or 2 days from now, but today, when they watch their little babies die because they don't have food, or their breasts don't even give milk, you know. And how are we supposed to sit back and ignore that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am not. You know, I just want people to understand.
Well, these are good questions, and
When things come up.
I think it would probably be helpful to stop bombing them. I think that would be welcome.
No, please
And secondly, it would be helpful if these so-called free trade deals didn't dump cheap commodities, rice and other food commodities that destroy agriculture in many of these countries. Judy, did you have your hand up?
Working people should support the anti-war movement, because the ruling class of this country has a two-edged sword. It fights the working class in the country as well as the working class around the world, and especially in Iraq and other countries where Canada is involved, like Haiti. So that's why working people should support the anti-war movement, various anti-war movements.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Yasin?
The question is, if the world is in permanent war, I think the question is what is to be done. I mean, at least since the Gulf War, all the major wars are being televised. Are we going to watch the war on TV, or are we going to do something about it? Barry mentioned the anti-war protest in Canada in the year March 2003. Actually, in the first 4 months of 2003, 36 million people participated in the anti-war movement. Around the world, 36 million. So, were we influential? I think we were. I will just give you one example. We couldn't stop the war, Iraq war, but we definitely slowed down the process. We definitely we were an obstacle before the United States. I will give you one example. Back in 2003, I was in Turkey. I was an undergrad student there. And we were almost like living on the streets. We were protesting against the war every day. And the United States was planning to open the second front, northern front, against to move 60,000 soldiers to attack to Iraq from north. And it had to take the consent of the Turkish assembly to use the bases, military bases in Turkey. So we mobilized and we stopped that. So they couldn't open a front in the north, I mean in the southern Turkey against Iraq. And they changed their plans. Perhaps they could make worse damage to Iraq and to the people of Iraq. But thanks to hundreds of thousands of people went to the street and demonstrated against war, they couldn't do that. I think we should draw one lesson from this. I mean, we could send petitions and letters to the members of the assembly. That's one way of doing politics. You just go to your computer, write an email to your councillor or
Member of Parliament.
Member of the parliament, so on and so forth. But I don't think that that's an effective strategy if you only do this. I think the most effective strategy is mass action. If you go to the streets with the hundreds of thousands of people, well, the MPs, the parliament members will listen to you. I mean, that's what history suggests, doesn't it? Also, in all, if you take a look at the history, all the mass movements against the war had influenced the political decision-making process.
Absolutely, and the mass movement of the Quebec students 2 years ago helped to hold the line on Quebec university fees, and even roll back those that had been imposed by the Charest government, the Liberal government. Now there's an election in Quebec, and there's a big campaign to vilify the Quebecois and even try to deny them the right to decide their future collectively. But these things are interrelated, so we need to resist the corporate agenda. Tyler?
Yeah, I think, well, you took my point about the Quebec students, so I'll go with my second one.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, it's fine. I think Yasser really hit the nail on the head, and I'll go into detail about that. But when answering the question, the world is at war, well, I think the first thing we need to do is look at who's the one who keeps pulling the trigger. And more often than not, it actually is the United States or its various puppet states like the European Union, Israel, etc. What the problem is when we look at these interventions, the capitalist nations there's no such thing as a free lunch mentality, that we will give you aid in exchange of reforming your economy to the way we want it, developing a neoliberalist government, becoming very friendly and photocopying our foreign policy, and then we'll give you enough aid just to keep you above drowning level. That's the problem with capitalism. There's nothing is done with genuinely good intentions. It's based on a profit motive. Now, what we need to do in regards to that is, one, we need to work to do whatever is possible to prevent the capitalists from advancing their war-based agenda. And Yassin brought it up quite nicely. The combination of formal politics, that being writing letters to your member of parliament, sending petitions, whatever, that is a vital part, but it's not the largest part. The largest part is the grassroots movements, the mass movements, the protests. What brought down the war in Vietnam, a huge part of it was that giant social movement said, no, we will not fight in this unjustified war. And we're seeing that again. And 36 million people, that's roughly the entire population of Canada. Just think about how large that is. So we need to be involved in that. We have to recognize and sympathize the plight that many people face in these developing nations, quote-unquote developing nations. But we need to recognize, how did they get there? It's because of Western powers interfering in their own affairs. That's what brought them there in the first place. They need to have their sovereignty respected first and foremost.
Yes, underdevelopment has its origins in the developed countries imposing their will. Yes, sir.
I was really tremendously impressed with the Turkish movement in 2003, and that's an example. We have some similar things with Occupy No More, the Occupy movement after the discrediting of major banks, so that the actual status of Wall Street and the main New York and London banks is immensely lower than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and it's sometimes easy, we forget this, but there have been devastating blows to the respect with which they're held. So
Yeah, so let's celebrate some of our victories. Let's not be always down on our efforts and our potential to affect change. Other comments, especially women? Any wish to say anything? Emma, where's the hand?
He was like this.
Yes, sorry, I didn't see you.
I missed the beginning of the movie. I don't know whether it dealt with dirty wars of the U.S. in Latin America early on.
It only referred to it. It didn't look at Central America.
What we're seeing is nothing new.
Yes.
I don't know what circulation the movie's got. It might be interesting to hear that. But I find myself having being in agreement with on the topic of Ukraine with some strange allies. I happened to turn on the Rex Monarchy show, whatever it's called, cross-country checkup on Ukraine. And one of the callers was a James Bissett, who is part of the Fraser Institute, and he came out quite eloquently pointing out that this was the situation in Ukraine. It's been totally unfair to the Russian interests. It's the breakdown of many, many promises that the West made to Gorbachev if he allowed Germany
To reunify, yes?
He goes into a long, long spiel, and he talks about the Americans spending €5 billion or $5 billion in Ukraine, and that they've overplayed their card, and of course, Ukraine is run by crooks. The recent president was a crook, the previous president was a crook, Putin is a crook, but notwithstanding that, the West has overstretched its limits totally. He pointed out that they're entitled to take back Ukraine or Crimea and so on. And I also, by coincidence, found myself reading a book on American foreign policy by a very right-wing guy in UK, Andrew Alexander, who writes in the Daily Mail, not a left-wing document. And he's writing about the foreign policy of the US basically since 1917, 1918. And he points out that they were responsible for the Cold War after the US was largely responsible for the Cold War. And Stalin comes out smelling like roses in terms of foreign policy issues in trying to assemble an alliance against Hitler, where the British and the French and the Poles wouldn't go along with it. And then later on, the US being the bad actors on the whole Cold War thing. It's kind of uncomfortable when you find yourself with colleagues like in agreement with people like this. But I started coming back to a Canadian perspective. This guy, James Bissett, he's a part of the Fraser Institute, but he's quite adamant. He raised the hypocrisy of Kosovo and the intervention in Libya. Of course, it wasn't to Rex Murphy's liking, but he had to put up with it.
Yeah, no, Rex Murphy's a piece of work. But it's interesting to see these cracks in the edifice, right? And when you have cracks in an edifice, it's no telling where they'll go exactly. And they bring in different voices that you wouldn't expect. Certainly, allies in the Fraser Institute, a little surprising. We've heard from the two of you before. Is there anyone else we haven't heard from who'd like to speak? You'll get to speak, but okay, why don't we wrap things up then with your comment and yours, and we'll go have a drink.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We mentioned the dirty war in Latin America and so on. In the film, there was mention of Blackwater, but
Now called XE Corporation.
no, they changed the name again.
Oh, again?
Now they're called Academy. But this is just
You
one.
need a program to tell the players, don't you?
There's a little initialism, PMF, which stands for Private Military Force. And at times in Iraq, there were more members of PMFs than there were members of the United States Armed Forces. And as we're talking about all these different issues around the world, we have to remember those private military forces, because part of what they do is to provide what the US State Department calls plausible deniability.
Right.
That is, they can dress somebody up and pretend that they're somebody else, although they're actually a private military force on the CIA payroll or somebody else's payroll.
And just to further your point, the reason why there's a growing reliance on these PMFs is because American public opinion is not in favor of expending American lives and treasure all over the world in the interests of Wall Street. Right? So they have to find another way to carry out their bloody agenda, and they do it through these contractors, right?
And they're not allowed to use the word mercenary because that's outlawed by the United Nations. So they don't use that word.
Wash my mouth out with soap if I ever use that.
But this is an extremely dangerous move for Wall Street, because typically a cadre of people like this are the ones who affect the military coup in a disturbed situation. So that's one of the things to press, I think.
And
The United
demobilize,
States is moving
demobilized
towards-
paramilitary like this can be the shock troops of a future fascist movement.
Exactly.
And we saw that in the lead up to,
Absolutely.
you know, the Nazi seizure of power in Germany and World War II and all of the wonderful events that followed that. D.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the sister's concern. It's kind of the hopelessness of being able to deal with, to help somebody in a village 7,000 miles away. The inability to really do anything can lead to hopelessness and stagnation here. So one of the points I was making around supporting indigenous people here is that the problems start in our own backyard. So if you're feeling kind of hopeless because you can't do anything 7,000 miles away, try doing something here.
Yes.
That's what we have to do. And this is what I've been saying for 40 years now. Nearly 45 years, actually, if I age myself, being an 8-year-old at the anti-war demonstration.
I think you're still, the indigenous people are still more ahead than
Everyone else.
the real, than everyone actually. And even those who were here before you people were here, the actual monarchs, the actual rulers
I'm
of the
free.
world,
I'm
of the
talking about
universe.
indigenous people.
Well,
I'm saying, though, we need support. We're being.
I said you're still more ahead than those people. Those people.
Oh, well, okay, let's
they're not
compare
even-
pain.
they don't even
I'm
get-
sorry.
Okay, let's respect her right to speak, please.
Okay.
D, you've got the floor.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's not about who's got more pain or not. You asked a question about what do we do 7,000 miles away, and I'm saying you can sit and you can think about that and be able to, the fact is you really can't do anything, write a letter, do that. But you can do something here, and the problem starts here. And I'm not into comparing misery or comparing pain. The reality is the mining companies did what they did here and said, oh, this works, let's do it somewhere else. Why do you think 87% of the mining companies in the world are incorporated in Canada? Because the federal corporation legislation, allows them to be exempt from any kind of environmental guides at all. So you can
Do
sit
you
over
want
there.
me to respond or not?
Well,
There's,
We,
no.
I invite you to join us at the pub where we will continue this conversation over,
And I choose not to have a discussion about you
Okay.
saying, well, those people are worse off than us. You don't have a clue what we're dealing with, if that's what
If you were to
Okay.
think about the Amerindians.
hang on.
Quite a different scenario.
Hang on. Let's continue the discussion informally, and I think it'll be illuminating and less frustrating if we can do that directly. Please visit the literature table before you leave, and if you want to do something to build a better world here and now, join Socialist Action, fill out the form, or at least get a subscription to our newspaper, the best socialist monthly in North America, and join us at the Regal Beagle Pub, which is on the south side of Bloor, just one block west of here, at Bloor and St. George, Regal Beagle, for more discussion and some drinks as well.
And
Thanks for
don't
coming.
leave alone, there's a gang of kids going around, and they're bashing people and stealing stuff. I'm with the Royal Reserve for the Music, and they sent us notices today. It's sort of a little guy with glasses, he looks about 10 years old and about 15, 14 years old. 40 people, stealing crackers and stealing gold and stealing things. Do not leave alone.